involved in the subject. Sometimes I think maybe I've lived so long and lived through so much, lived through quite a bit of history, and I think all of us need to be careful. Careful when we speak to people, careful in our day-by-day relationship, because we do not know when we're making history and when we are communicating with people who are going to make history. Now I met, the title is called Kwame Nkrumah and the Challenge of the New Nations, New State in Africa. The focus point is on Kwame Nkrumah as a personality and the new states in Africa, because of all the states in Africa that could have become the role model of what an African state could have been, Ghana could have been that state. And had Ghana become the role model for that state, it could have turned Africa around in such a way that all the scheming of the West could not have stopped it. We have to examine again and again why that state did not succeed. And once you understand why the state did not succeed, you also have a key to why the Caribbean Federation didn't succeed and why the Civil Rights Movement didn't succeed. It was not rooted in anything that was traditionally African. That you cannot plant your roots in someone else's soil and grow, and you cannot plant your roots in someone else's political ideology and grow. No matter what political ideology you use for your nation, you have to Africanize it and make it your own. I have delivered several talks on the relationship of Africa to the Chinese cultural revolution. Really, there is no direct relationship between Africa and the Chinese Revolution. Then what am I talking about? I'm looking at the Chinese Revolution because what the Chinese were doing is something the African people throughout the whole world still have to do. Yes. And I was hoping that when they do it, they could hold the blood to a minimum. They have to cut away the dirty waste matter of years of exploitation, years of foreign matter, years of imitation of other people's culture, other people's clothes, other people's food, other people's women, other people's culture. Get back to basics. Get back to basics. Yes. They might have to do in part what Gandhi told the people of India to do. When he came back, took off his Western clothes, took off his British shoes, said, I won't wear anything that I don't make with my own hand. Made some some sandals, went back to the spinning wheel, put on a long diaper with a wrap around. When the British were charging too much for salt, led his famous salt march to the sea. Back to basics. We might have to step back in order to go forward.
Right. Teach.
We might have to nerve to eat the bread that we grow, wear the clothes that we grow. Now, I advocated something in a speech relating to Martin Luther King. When I got in the middle of the speech, two smiling ladies came to the podium. This is a memorial tribute to Martin Luther King, and we'll brook no criticism. But I said, suppose, and let me fantasize a little while. And my speech was entitled, "But Martin Luther King did not learn about Mahatma Gandhi." I said, suppose Martin Luther King stood in public and took off all his clothes except his underwear and said, "I'll never wear any clothes my people don't make. I'll never wear any shoes my people don't make. I'll never eat any bread my people don't make. Now, if you don't want me to starve, feed me. If you want me to wear good clothes, make some. Because I won't wear them unless you make them."
Yes.
I said, he could have revolutionized our
Right. That's right.
overnight. Because we wouldn't let our pastor go around in rags. We'd have found some good clothes for our pastor soon. We start imitating him and made some good clothes for ourselves.
That's right. That's right.
We start buying them from other people. We go to the field. Somebody need a pool room. Go to the cornfield. We build an economy. But at the point when the lady pulled me down, I said that our beloved one should not even be buried in a coffin that we won't make. Then the lady said, "That's enough." Had enough. They don't know that the coffin industry is controlled by the mafia. Any good carpenter with imagination can make a decent coffin. What I was talking about, what I was trying to get at, is that we are a dependent people of consumers. And that we can make jobs for ourselves by beginning to produce for ourselves the very basic things for ourselves. We are a floating nation within a nation searching for a nationality. Then we have to realize our nationhood and stop talking about nation time until we understand what the structure of a nation is and fulfill the requirements of a nation. Now, my subject is Kwame Nkrumah and the challenge of the new states in Africa. And I'm going to go to the subject. I'm from a Baptist environment. So I'm going to take my text. I might leave my text, but I'm going to go back to it. Now, I met Kwame Nkrumah around 1938. I met him soon after the Italian-Ethiopian War in the old Harlem History Club. This is important because I met him in a political atmosphere that not only going to influence his career, but it's going to influence my career, going to influence the future direction of Ghana and Africa too. The old Harlem History Club need to be talked about, because out of the Harlem History Clubs came the shaping of a concept that you would later know as Black Studies. A generation before young people got hold of it, made a political thing out of it without thoroughly understanding it. Came a great teacher, Willis N. Huggins, long since dead now, who began to draw up a design for the study of African people of the world. They held it in the chapel of the Harlem Y, seated 60 people. It was rather ever full. Into this chapel came African students, different students, then a quiet, introspective student from Lincoln University during the summer, then called Francis K. Nkrumah. Quiet, introspective, studied to be a minister. And he had to take a lot of good-natured kidding from us, and sometimes he felt ill at ease. He said, boy, Africa don't need any more ministers. Italians up and kicked the hell out of Ethiopia. You should at least be a carpenter, if nothing else. You stand and be a preacher. What can Africa do with a preacher? Preacher don't shoot nobody. We got enough preachers here in Harlem. We can send out some preachers. This is before he switched to political science. And what I remember most about him, he was always clean. His clothes were rather ever pressed, but they were clean. Had on a tie, pulled a tie. But he argued persuasively, and he didn't argue often. Crooked his head to one side, and listened. And he never argued until he had his argument ready. And once he got it ready, he argued well. And he laughed over his victory, celebrating it more than anyone else. He laughed over his own jokes and expected you to do the same. He was a fine practical joker. He'd always tried to get the best of an argument once he's decided to argue. Had a fine political head on him. He'd already written his pamphlet toward colonial freedom. We never expected him to be anything of any consequence. It was in this atmosphere that he came into Harlem trying to get a job. And one summer he was selling fish, and he lost money because it was a hot summer and the fish got stale and he couldn't sell it. This is Kwame Nkrumah. No one ever called him Kwame. All right. This summer of the Depression and the end of the so-called Harlem Renaissance, this is part of his political shaping. And I can tell you why it was part of his political shaping. The master Harlem street speakers were very prevalent during this period. Ira Kemp, king of them all, Arthur B. These were the great superstars of the Harlem street speakers. This was the period of the coming of Bishop Cruikshank, who later emerged as Suffolk Arm, who started the whole campaign, don't buy while you can't work. This is the period of when blacks couldn't even get jobs at 125th Street in the heart of Harlem. And this is the period when we started the river-to-river picket line. Now he was exposed to all of this. He was also exposed to the re-emergence of Garveyism and the reconsideration of Garveyism and a new respect for Garveyism at the end of this war. And almost a cultist fascination for Garvey's magazine, the Black Man magazine. We now begin to give Garvey and Garvey's magazine attention it never had before, because Garvey's prophecy about Africa had come to pass. No, this is the atmosphere. Nkrumah, living in Harlem, had no room of his own, so he lived with other African students, one to the other, who did have rooms at different addresses in Harlem, two brothers. His entertainment was to wander up and down the streets of Harlem, arguing with the street speakers. One street speaker, Randolph Wilson, known as Rasty Keller, ended up as a character in Ralph Ellison's novel, Invisible Man, as Rasty Keller.
Oh,
Rasty was the star.
Thank you. Okay.
That was one he argued with a great deal. Now, street speakers came in classes, those who argued on 7th Avenue, that was the graduate school street speakers. Now, those who argued on Lenox Avenue, that's the working class neighborhood, that was the college of street speakers. Rasty Keller was a Lenox Avenue street speaker. Carlos Cook was on 7th Avenue, along with Ira Kemp and Reed. These were the senior street speakers. And that was Nkrumah's entertainment. It was also part of his political education in the Harlem community. I wrote a long article about this in the Black Scholar a few years ago, called Kwame Nkrumah, His American Years. And of course, I write as easy as I breathe, and you might have missed it. It's there someplace, but I've got it. My main point is that Kwame Nkrumah would stay in America, and he would leave America during the war. He would leave with a letter from C.L. Aura James. The letter would be to George Padmore. The letter would tell George Padmore, this is likely a young man with some promise, and maybe if you introduce him to some books to straighten out his political thinking, he might be something worthwhile, and a year or so might make something out of himself. Nkrumah did not read the letter at the time. Gave it to Padmore. Padmore commenced to shape his political education. Years later, I happened to be in Ghana at the time. Nkrumah gave a big dinner for C.L.R. James, who was visiting Ghana, opened the letter again and read it in front of C.L.R. James, and laughed so much they almost had to take him off the floor. He was a great practice. No harm, no malicious intent at all. Said, do you think now that I'm head of state that I'm worth something? Just that kind of joker, but with no malicious intent at all, no anger, no nothing, you know. It was a big thing to him. All right, now, he would go to London. He would begin to shape his political thinking. George Padmore, in the meantime, black man in the Communist Party of Europe, head of, a member of the Comintern, had broken with the party. And James described the first morning he saw him after the break. George Padmore came to his house, and George Padmore is Malcolm Lewis, was his real name. He changed to George Padmore while he was in the United States. Now, George Padmore was one of these communists who didn't look like a communist because he came from a rich family in Trinidad. He dressed like an English lord and acted like one most of the time. You know, pedigree pipe and, you know, and fancy clothes and all. And C.L.R. James, he showed up at his house for the first time unshaved and with no tie. He said, I have broken with those people. And he broke it over nationalism. The national issue, George Padmore said, the choice between nationalism and world communism, he chose the nationalism. Now, Nkrumah is now under the tutelage of George Padmore. You have to understand, Nkrumah's initial ideas, his political ideas were shaped by George Padmore. You must understand the significance of George Padmore in not only shaping the mind of Nkrumah, but shaping the mind of present day of many African leaders. Because George Padmore was an anti-colonial writer, and the best of the anti-colonial writers. In the 30s, as a student at Fisk University, he was writing on French colonialism in Vietnam, in Indonesia, in the 30s, while a student at Fisk University, and writing exceptionally well. Now, his writings about anti-colonialism in Asia has never been collected into one book. But his writings about anti-colonialism in Africa has been collected into other books. And there's a lot of George Padmore books, not generally known. You know about his book, Pan-Africanism or Communism, but his book, Africa, England's Third Empire, How Britain Rules Africa. Oh, you know about those. But Padmore really wrote about 13, 14 books in his lifetime, and plus a number of essays. All right, now, this is the main focus of the map. By 45, George Padmore, Kwame Nkrumah, Peter Abrams, Nanda Ezekwe, Jomo Kenyatta, then called John Stone Kenyatta, Amy Ashwood Garvey calls the 5th Pan-African Congress, Manchester, England. This might well be the most important of the Pan-African Congresses, because here, at last, you see a Pan-African Congress with Africans taking the lead. Now, the first Pan-African Congress, H. Sylvester Williams, a Trinidadian, took the lead. W.E.B. Du Bois invited. After that, W.E.B. Du Bois took the lead in the next 4 Congresses, the next 3. Especially the critical one, 1990. Now the ball is back in the court of the Caribbeans and the Africans. W.E.B. Du Bois is invited one more time. But now, Pan-Africanism is taking a different turn, and it's in new hands. It is no longer in Black American hands. It is basically in the administrative hands of Africans and Caribbeans. Now, at this conference of future African heads of state, Africans who is going to shape the Africa of tomorrow, the very ideas that's going to go into the shaping of Ghana are being designed and laid out at this conference. A lot of the future things that Nkrumah would announce to the world are designed at this conference. Nkrumah is the secretary, one of the conveners. The main brains of the 5th Pan-African Conference. And never forget it. The brains, the heart, the soul, the political muscle, the ideological being of the 5th Pan-African Conference is George Padmore, the great Trinidadian, the middle Pan-Africanist. Remember, the Pan-Africanists from the Caribbean of the 20th century, H. Sylvester Williams, who called the first Pan-African Conference in London, 1900. George Padmore, the great theoretician. C.L. Laura James, the philosopher of Pan-Africanism. 3 Trinidadians, mainly. W.E.B. Du Bois, who picked it up after H. Sylvester Williams and carried it to the Fed, and who became the major Afro-American Pan-Africanist, and carried it during the transitional period from the 1st through the 5th. Invited to the 1st, invited to the 5th. He became principally the father and the keeper and the guardian of the transitional period of Pan-Africanism. Now, Pan-Africanism is taking a different turn because Pan-Africanism is about to find itself a home. And if you look at the design of the Ghana still to come, you can understand that the design came out of the 5th Pan-African Conference, and most of these design came from the mind of George Padmore. And if you read his book, Pan-Africanism or Communism, you'll see that design. If you see how Britain rules Africa, Britain's 3rd empire, you'll see also his book on the Gold Coast. You see, it's all the ideas, then read the ideas of Kwame Nkrumah. You can see that Kwame Nkrumah was literally parroting the ideas of George Padmore. Okay, 1947, the schoolmaster of Kwame Nkrumah, Joseph B. Danquah, Ghana's premier intellect, whose position in Ghana as a senior intellect parallels the position of W.E.B. Du Bois in the United States, heard that his old student, Kwame Nkrumah, was in England broke and wanted to come home. He invites Nkrumah to come back to Ghana to be his secretary as he had the United Gold Coast Convention. England does not permit political parties to exist. So you have pseudo-political parties under semi-political names. Danquah is in charge of the United Gold Coast Convention. And Nkrumah comes back to be Danquah's secretary. Nkrumah is a different Nkrumah. In fact, Nkrumah is never addressed as Nkrumah by Danquah. Danquah speaks to Nkrumah the same way he spoke to him when Nkrumah was a schoolboy under Danquah. He calls him Francis. And anytime Nkrumah gets out of line, even as a full-grown man now back from college, Danquah addresses Nkrumah the same way he addressed him when he was a boy in school. Francis, stop talking nonsense. Now, Nkrumah comes back to be Danquah's secretary. Now listen well, because I want to show you why something went wrong. something went wrong to not only change Ghana, but may have changed all that. Dankwa is and was an African traditionalist who wanted to build a modern African state based on the values of African tradition. Modern African laws based on African tradition. Even if you had Marxism, he wanted to Africanize it. He respected the village, he respected the model, he respected the marketplace, he respected tropical agriculture. He was one of the founders of the Provisional Council of Chiefs. He respected the family structure. He respected the lineage, he respected the kingship. He wanted all of this respected, and he did not see any contradiction in preserving all of this and bringing it into the structure of a modern state. And he saw in these Western educated Africans some impatience with that ceremony of the modern state, into a modern state. Now, Kwame Nkrumah became his secretary, but began to get impatient. This impatience led to the younger members of the United Gold Coast Convention rallying around Nkrumah to the displeasure of Dankwa. Finally, Nkrumah wanted to make a break with his old schoolmaster. Nkrumah was brought home to be prepared to be handed the mantle of political leadership. But instead of waiting to be handed the mantle of political leadership, he made the mistake of seizing it ahead of time. So now, he organizes the young people in the United Gold Coast Convention, pulls them out, and finds the Convention People's Party. This angered the old schoolmaster, who now labels him an ingrate. Because Dankwa came up under Casely Hayford, father of modern Ghanaian politics in the 20th century, who began to protest the exiling of the Ghanaian kings, Prempeh and the Queen Yea Asantewaa, and built political consciousness based on that. And when he died in 1931, he handed the mantle of leadership over to Dankwa, hoping that Dankwa would train after him a leader and hand the mantle over. This is the way things are done in traditional society. Instead of waiting for the mantle, Nkrumah, too long in the West, had taken the mantle. Now the break between the traditional and the modern. Dankwa is now part of the opposition. That's unfortunate. But Nkrumah has enough popularity to swing it. A combination of parties rallies around Nkrumah. There's some disturbance. People marching on the governor's palace in the crossroads. This is on the governor then lived at Osu, Christopher Castle. A member of the servicemen's group, Sergeant Adeti, is shot. There's disturbance throughout the country. They're accusing Nkrumah. So Nkrumah goes, thinking Nkrumah's group started. So Nkrumah goes to South Pole, hides away. And he goes to Kumasi, hides away. Then finally he's arrested. While he's in jail, there's an election. While he's in jail, Jabarama and Elvi takes over the party. This is significant that he's in Elvi, because the Elvis are from Togo. And the Elvis are angry because their country has been split. There's been a plebiscite. Most of that country becomes part of Ghana. But because he's in Elvi, he calms down, his group calms down, because they now see that country, see one of that group as part of the government. So that keeps the airways somewhat pacified. So while Nkrumah is away, is in jail, he began to pass notes out of jail to the party. The notes are written on British toilet paper. It doesn't speak well for British toilet paper. If the toilet paper is hard enough for writing paper, it's too soft for toilet paper. Hard enough for writing paper, then it's not soft enough for toilet paper. But be that as it may, when the men come at night to empty the containers, he slips his hand through the hole and hands up the notes. This is distributed. So his popularity soars, and they finally had to let him out of jail, and he heads the government. Donkor had told him, and seemingly correctly, if you wait, say, 12 years, and as much as we get a college group, probably once every 4 years, we'll have enough graduates for civil service and all this, you know. So when come independence, we'll have people in place for teachers, you know. Well, he's going to wait 10 years anyway, so 2 years wouldn't matter that much. I really think Donkor was basically right in his estimation of when independence needed to come and when things needed to be put in place. That old man was shrewd. He was a trained lawyer, you know. Take it slower, but take it right. But do it right. But in Nkrumah's glamour boys, rushing things. No. Because in the year, almost a year I spent in Ghana, escaping from the atmosphere of the Garda period and all of that, I had plenty of time to listen to both sides. I had plenty of time to be thorough on this one. On this, I didn't have no time to play a game. And to read the literature of both sides. All right, now, Donkor continued with the opposition. Nkrumah continued to build and to be popular. Donkor continued to be accepted as a senior intellect in Ghana, respected by the young and old, because Donkor had built a great youth movement in Ghana. He'd taken over from Casely Hayford. Casely Hayford is really the father of modern Ghanaian politics. Someone needs to read a good history of the politics of Ghana. Why Ghana could have been the role model is because the people of Ghana were basically homogeneous. Basically homogeneous because they were either Akan people or non-Akan people who had made peace with the Akans. And they had never had any fight so extensive that there was so much bitterness that one was settled before the kind of bitterness settled in and made them be at each other's throat forever. They not only settled it, but ultimately they end up marrying each other. In other words, it was not like Nigeria. Nigeria, you had the Hausas and the Fulanis, both northerners, who had fought a bitter war, the Hausa-Fulani War. That bitterness was still there. But in the north, in the east, and the west, you had the Igbos and the Yorubas. And you had other groups in between that, suspicious of both of them. You had a checkered coat of cultures that had not gelled. In Ghana, more than any other country in Africa, you had cultures that had come together and made peace with each other, even in the north. So Ghana became the ideal country in Africa to be the role model of what an African state, independent of colonial rule at last, could be. The proper experiment was the experiment with the African culture form and political form could have taken place. But the Western educated African had no patience with this experiment. And the people around Nkrumah had no patience. All right, now, Nkrumah's government continued to make progress in popularity with the people until the time came for the real test. Nkrumah was head of home government, but the country wasn't independent until the election of 1957. So he had almost 10 years when he was head of government under British tutelage. Now, the election is not only to head the government, but the election is now for independence. So the country's name would be changed from the Gold Coast to Ghana. It was Dankwa's idea to call it Ghana, because the people who populated the area came from the ancient state of Ghana in 1076 AD, when the Muslims came into that area. The people living in a state called Acania, people called the Akan, decided to move down out of the area, because they always moved in out of way of people trying to impose religions on them, not of their choosing. So they migrated down to the Volta River, and when there was a difference of opinion between some of them and others, the Fantis moved to the coast, and the Tweeds moved to the coast. And when the slave trade hit Nigeria, the Ga people moved down there, and the people from Togo, the Ewes, moved partly into that area. So in the north, you find the Musi people, and that area was attached later on. I'm trying to give you the composition of the country. But the non-Akans had made peace with the Akans. And during the period of Osara Tutu, the first king of the reorganization of the Akan people, after they came down, early in the 18th century, when they reorganized their society and their culture, when the Akans refederated themselves under the great priest Akamfu Enochi, when he said that whosoever comes under the Ashanti umbrella and obeys Ashanti law is Akan, is Ashanti. All of the smaller tribes who had no strong chiefs, no strong leaders, came under the authority of the Akan. So the Akan became a great big people with a whole lot of attachments. So this federation Now, the concept of tribalism gave way to the concept of state. So you can understand that here is an African state that had grown accustomed to having a multiplicity of people of different cultures under one rule, all respecting each other in a pluralistic setting, had already grown accustomed to that long before the British, had already fought 11 wars to preserve that culture. The last war, led by a woman, Yeva Santiago, the last Ashanti woman, had already given splendid accounts of themselves on the field of battle, had already had a tradition of valor. This is the big that was ideal. All right, now, in the election, 1957, Nkrumah's party, the Convention People's Party, won out over a multiplicity of parties under the umbrella of being the United Party. These are all the opposition parties, came under one grouping, the United Party. Having won out, Nkrumah stood in the playground, on the parade ground that night, ordered the Ghanaian national anthem to be played for the first time, and said, "Ghana, our beloved country, at last the long night is over. Ghana, our beloved country, is free forever." What I'm saying is that the significance of the event had gone unnoticed. But the important thing of this event that went unnoticed in the West, that a conversational child, a naked child, had been wandering away from home, called Pan-Africanism. The naked child, the motherless child, had found a mother. The motherless child had a home. Pan-Africanism now became a reality. It has now a land base. You could no longer speak of Pan-Africanism as an abstraction. And that the nationalists and the political theoreticians in the West missed the point by not understanding this. And that our nationalists, nearly always amateur theoreticians, missed that point then, missed that point now.
Right.
Now, after March 7th, 1957, it was a new kind of day for Africa. It was a new kind of day for the African world. Do not think that this went unnoticed by the colonial world, because the mentality of Africa leaped forward. Ghana's example set in motion the passion of African people to control their own destiny.
Yes.
Right.
Now, what are they going to do without the gold, the manganese, the timber, the hide, all of the resources, feeding riches, feeding grist into the mills of the West? You think they're going to just walk away from all of that? They began to plan the coups and the counter-coups. The CIA, British intelligence, all the intelligence forces of the world, left and right, and don't leave out left. Your mission is to control the world by any means necessary and you are dream struck. You think that you got a friend among one of them. You have no friends among either one of them.
All right, all right.
So you can use either one of them that you can use and discard either one you can discard. And you don't have to have any compunctions about it, any regrets about it.
Teach good.
You're still behaving on sentiment. Power has nothing to do with sentiment.
That's right.
Get what you can as fast as you can. Run as fast as you can and bring it home. Something is going now. After Ghana became